Entrapment, my partner's unbelievable lies. Have you ever had that feeling where your heart just drops, way before your brain has a chance to figure out why? That was me. Standing in my own home, holding a single piece of paper that proved my whole relationship was a lie. And in that 1 second, I knew. I had to pull apart his web of deception, no matter what it cost. He'd built an entire world for us, a world I truly believed was real. But it was all fake, a carefully built fantasy, and he was the master architect. This is the story of how I found out the man I loved was a total stranger, and how I set a trap to expose the unbelievable truth he was trying so hard to hide. When I first met Mark, it felt like the universe was finally cutting me a break. He was the kind of guy everyone tells you to find. He was charming, but not in that slick, practiced way. It was a goofy, infectious charm that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He was ambitious, always talking about his next big project at his marketing firm, his voice buzzing with a passion that was impossible to resist. His stories were incredible, filled with wild characters and dramatic plot twists. He'd tell me about tough clients he'd won over with his genius, or about these fancy business trips to cities I'd only dreamed of seeing. His life felt like a movie, and I was just thrilled to be a part of it. We fell into this rhythm that was both comfortable and completely intoxicating. He was the sun, and I was happy just to be in his orbit. Our apartment, the one he insisted we get in a nicer part of town, was filled with his energy, his things. And every object had a story. The slightly dented antique globe? Found it in a Paris flea market on a solo trip after college. Those expensive leather-bound books? First editions he'd been collecting for years. He painted this picture of a life lived to the absolute fullest, a life of adventure and success, and he invited me right into the frame. He was also so attentive. He remembered the tiniest details about me. My favorite flower, my childhood dog's name, how I take my coffee. He made me feel seen in a way I never had before. When I was feeling insecure about my career, he was my #1 cheerleader. When I felt down on myself, he would list all the reasons he loved me, and his voice was so convincing that my own anxieties just seemed silly. He was building up my confidence, but at the same time, he was making me depend on him for that feeling of worth. It's a sneaky kind of control, isn't it? Building you up just to make you need him for your own self-esteem. Looking back, the signs were all there, staring me right in the face. His stories, as captivating as they were always just a little too perfect, a little too much like a movie script. He almost never introduced me to the colleagues he talked so much about. There was always a convenient excuse. Oh, Dave's out of town, or Sarah's totally swamped, we'll all grab dinner next month. That next month never came. His family was another fuzzy part of his life. He'd talk about them in this loving but vague way. They lived far away, his mom was sick a lot, so visits were tough. And it all made sense at the time. I was in love. When you're in love, you accept the answers you're given because you want to believe them. You build your trust on their words, never stopping to check if you're building on concrete or on sand. I was about to find out mine was built on nothing at all. The first crack in his perfect world was so small you could barely see it. It was a Tuesday night, just a quiet night in. Mark was on his laptop, hammering out what he called a game-changing proposal for some huge new client. I was on the couch reading, just enjoying the silence. His phone, which was usually attached to him, was on the coffee table. It buzzed, and the screen lit up. The text was from a name I didn't know, Liam. The preview was short, still on for tomorrow? Need to confirm the numbers. It seems innocent, right? But this cold knot formed in my stomach. Just an hour before, I'd asked Mark what his plans were for the next day. He'd smiled and said, absolutely nothing. Just me and you, a whole day to ourselves. He even planned on making me dinner. So why would a colleague be confirming a meeting? I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was an old text. Maybe Liam had the wrong person. My brain was scrambling for a logical reason, which is what you do when you're desperate to avoid a painful truth. But the feeling, that gut instinct that something's wrong, just wouldn't leave. I waited a beat, my heart starting to pound. Hey, who's Liam? I asked. I tried to sound casual, like the thought just floated into my head. Mark didn't even look up from his computer. Oh, just a guy from work. He's new. His fingers just kept moving. The answer was too fast, too dismissive. The text says you're on for tomorrow, I pushed, my voice a little unsteady. I thought we were spending the day together. This time, he looked up. And he didn't look confused or sorry. He looked annoyed. It's not a big deal, he said, his tone sharp. He's just being a little overeager. I'll handle it. You're overthinking things. And there it was. That phrase. You're overthinking it. I was starting to hear that a lot. If I questioned a detail in one of his stories, I was reading too much into it. If I felt a little jealous, I was being too sensitive. It's classic gaslighting, right? He was making me feel like my own feelings were wrong, that my own mind was the one I couldn't trust. He turned back to his laptop, and that was that. Conversation over. I just sat there, the book totally forgotten in my lap. The silence in the room wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy and suffocating. It was such a small lie, but it was a lie. And it was the first time it hit me that Mark didn't just tell big, fancy stories. He told small, useless lies too. That realization was the beginning of the end. It was the first loose thread. And I knew, with a feeling that was both terrifying and empowering, I had to pull it. After that text message, everything shifted. The perfect world he'd painted started to look off. The colors seemed fake. I started seeing things I'd brushed off before, tiny little inconsistencies that didn't mean much on their own, but when I started stringing them together, they formed a really disturbing picture. This wasn't about one lie anymore. It was about the possibility that everything was a lie. I felt like a detective in my own home. I started listening to his stories differently, not for the entertainment, but for the plot holes. He'd mention a big team dinner at a restaurant I knew had shut down months ago. When I gently called him on it, he'd just laugh. Oh, was it that one? No, must have been the place a block over. You know how I am with names. He'd get defensive if I questioned him, a dead giveaway someone's hiding something. He'd answer direct questions with vague, slippery answers, anything to deflect and confuse me. The real digging started with his money. Mark always acted like he was incredibly successful. He paid the rent on our expensive apartment, wore designer clothes, and never blinked at a huge dinner bill. But I was the one who managed our household budget, and I started noticing his contributions were getting weird. Sometimes they were late. Sometimes they were less than we'd agreed on, always with some complicated story. The client's late paying the invoice, or payroll is switching systems, it's a total disaster. My suspicion grew into this gnawing feeling. I needed proof. Something real, something he couldn't talk his way out of. I felt so guilty about it, but the need for truth was stronger. One afternoon, he was out for a client lunch, and he'd left his laptop at home, which he never did. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was betraying him, but I also felt like I was on the verge of a breakthrough. I went straight for his email. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I figured I'd know it when I saw it. And I did. It wasn't a secret love letter. It was something so much more boring, and so much more devastating. It was a long chain of overdue notices. Credit card bills, car payments, even rent reminders from our own building. All in his name, all with bright red letters screaming payment overdue. I went cold. The man who gave me lectures about having a good credit score was drowning in debt. The fancy dinners, the nice clothes, the apartment. It was all a show, financed with money he didn't have. He wasn't some high-flying marketing exec. He was just a guy living a life he couldn't afford, and he'd wrapped me up in his lie. The shame I felt for snooping vanished, replaced by this cold, hard anger. He hadn't just lied to me, he'd made me a part of his financial fantasy. My name was on the lease, too. But that was just the beginning. Finding out about the money made me question everything else. His job. His family. His whole life story. He had this whole persona of a successful, worldly guy, and I realized I had never seen a single piece of proof. So, I decided to set a trap. It felt manipulative, but hey, I was dealing with a master manipulator. It was time to use his own moves against him. A few days later, I came home and casually mentioned an article I'd read about a big corporate merger. I made the whole thing up, including the name of a fake company that had supposedly bought out the firm he worked for. I watched his face while I talked. "Isn't that insane?" I said, pretending to be excited. "They're saying there are going to be huge changes. I hope your job is safe." A normal person who worked there would have been confused. They would have said, "I haven't heard a thing about that," or "Where did you see that?" Not Mark. Mark, the pathological liar, saw a chance to add to his own mythology. His eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, it's huge," he said, nodding like he was an insider. "I've been in meetings about this for weeks. They're actually talking about putting me in charge of the whole transition. It's a massive promotion, but I didn't want to say anything until it was a sure thing." He didn't just agree with my lie, he embellished it, making himself the hero of a story I'd invented 2 seconds earlier. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just someone who told lies. This was someone whose entire reality was built out of them, probably because of some deep-seated insecurity. The last piece was his family. The sick mom, the distant dad. I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it. I looked up his mother's name on social media. It was easy to find her. Her profile was public, filled with pictures of her garden, her dog, and her weekly bridge games. She did not look too sick to travel. In fact, she looked happy and full of life. And in her pictures, there was Mark. But there was also another woman, and 2 little kids. In photo after photo, they were posed together like a happy family. The caption on a picture from just 3 months before read, "So proud of my son Mark, his beautiful wife, and my wonderful grandchildren." Wife. Grandchildren. The words just blurred on the screen. I literally couldn't breathe. It wasn't just that he was a liar. He was a husband. A father. The life he had with me, in our expensive apartment, was his second life. His escape. And I was the lead actress in his twisted little play without even knowing it. The world he'd built didn't just have a few cracks, it had a giant canyon running through it, and I had been living on the wrong side the whole time. That single piece of paper I mentioned at the beginning? It was a printout of that photo. The final, undeniable, heart-shattering proof. I told myself I wouldn't scream. I wanted the confrontation to be cold, quiet, like the air before a thunderstorm. I waited for him to get home that night. I put the photo, the printout from his mom's social media, face down on the kitchen island. All the other lights in the apartment were off. I wanted him to walk right into that one single spotlight. This was the stage I'd set for the final act. He walked in, whistling, and dropped his keys in the bowl. "Hey, you're home early," he said, all cheerful. He walked into the kitchen and then he stopped. He saw me standing there, arms crossed, my face like a stone. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing at the heavy mood in the room. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, letting the silence get so tense it felt like it was buzzing. Then, very slowly, I flipped the photograph over. He glanced down at it. For just a fraction of a second, I saw it in his eyes, pure, unfiltered panic. The mask slipped. It was the quickest moment, but I saw the real Mark, a scared little kid caught red-handed. And just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The mask was back, but it was a different one this time. A mask of confusion, of concern for me. "What is this?" he asked, his voice soft, like he was talking to someone who was having a breakdown. "Who are these people?" I almost laughed out loud. It was so bold, so unbelievable, it was almost comical. Even when I had him cornered with absolute proof, his first move was to lie again. To try to make me question my own sanity one last time. "Don't," I said, and my voice was dangerously low. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare try to gaslight me right now." I had planned to use I statements, to tell him how his actions made me feel. "I feel so stupid," I started, and my voice finally cracked. "I feel like I have been a complete fool for 2 years. I defended you. I trusted you. I loved a man who doesn't even exist." "You're not making any sense," he said, shaking his head. He tried to take a step toward me, reaching out his hand. "You're clearly upset. Let's just sit down and talk about this." He was trying to take back control of the story, to calm down the crazy woman he had created. That's when the quiet ended. "Talk about what, Mark?" I snapped, stepping back from him. "Your wife? Your kids? Or should we start with the mountain of debt you're in? The job you don't actually have? What about that promotion you invented yesterday from a lie I told you? Where do you want to begin?" Every lie I threw at him was like a physical blow. His face started to crumble. Then came the anger. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, pointing at the photo. "Have you been spying on me? Going through my things?" It was a classic deflection, trying to make what I did the problem instead of what he did. "It doesn't matter how I found out." I was yelling now. All the emotion I'd been holding back just exploded out of me. "The only thing that matters is that it's the truth. For once, can you just tell the truth?" He just stared at me, his jaw tight, his mind racing, trying to find one more lie, one more way out. But there weren't any left. I had him trapped. His shoulders just slumped. He looked down at the picture of his smiling family, and then he looked back at me. And in his eyes, there was nothing. No guilt. No remorse. Not even sadness. Just the flat, empty look of a performer whose show just got cancelled. And there was zero remorse in his eyes. Nothing. That was maybe the most chilling part. "So what now?" he asked, his voice completely empty. And right then, I knew. I wasn't just dealing with a man who lied. I was dealing with a hollow man. A man with no real self, just a collection of stories he told to get what he wanted. All my anger just drained away and was replaced by this profound, cold emptiness. I wasn't losing the love of my life. I was firing an actor. The hours right after were strangely silent. There were no more fights, no begging for forgiveness. The show was over, and there was nothing left to say. He packed a bag without a word, avoiding my eyes as he moved through the apartment that was no longer ours. It was just a set for a play that had closed. He gathered his expensive clothes and his little trinkets with their fake backstories. The whole facade of the man I thought I knew went into that bag. When he was finished, he stood at the door. He finally looked at me, and his expression was just blank. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were flat, like they weighed nothing. They were just more lines from a script, said with no feeling because the director had already yelled cut. He was sorry he got caught, not sorry for what he did. And then he was gone. The click of the lock echoed in the silent apartment. It was a sound of finality that was somehow both heartbreaking and a huge relief. I just stood there for a long time, surrounded by the debris of our fake life. The air felt thick with the ghosts of 2 years of lies. I walked through the rooms and felt like a stranger in my own home. Everything I looked at, the couch where we cuddled, the kitchen where he'd pretended to plan our future, it was all tainted. It was all part of the set. The next few days were a total blur of grief and confusion. I had to face the fact that the man I loved was a complete work of fiction. It's a weird thing, grieving someone who never really existed. I questioned everything, not just about him, but about myself. How could I have been so blind? How did I ignore so many red flags? The gaslighting had worked so well that I was left doubting my own judgment, my own perception of reality. That self-doubt is one of the worst things about being with a liar like him. I felt so ashamed. I had to tell my friends and family that my perfect relationship was a total fraud, that my partner was actually a married father. It felt like admitting this huge personal failure. But to my surprise, nobody judged me. They supported me. Turns out, they had seen the cracks I'd refused to see. My best friend admitted she'd always thought he was a little too smooth. My brother confessed he could never get a straight answer from him about anything. They had seen the signs but had respected my happiness enough to wait for me to see them myself. Their validation was a lifeline. It was the first step toward getting my own reality back. The fallout was huge, but as the dust settled, I realized that his world had to be demolished before I could start rebuilding my own. It's been a long time since that night. The apartment doesn't feel empty anymore. It's filled with my own things, my own energy. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy and it was hard, and a big part of it was learning to trust myself again. I had to accept that being lied to doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. You're not crazy for trusting someone you love. You're not weak for wanting to believe in the good in people. Looking back, I get it now. What he did was never about me. It was all about him. It was about his own emptiness, his own insecurities. Pathological liars create these fantasy worlds because they can't stand their own reality. They're actors who are terrified of the day the audience leaves and they're left alone with who they really are. I wasn't the love of his life, I was just his best role. The most important thing I learned from all of this is to trust my gut. For months, I had that little knot in my stomach telling me something was off. But I let his words, his gaslighting, and my own desperate wish for a fairy tale to be real, shut that voice down. I will never, ever silence it again. That feeling is your oldest and best form of protection. You have to trust it. Listen to it when it whispers, and definitely listen to it when it screams. Setting that trap wasn't just about catching him. It was about me taking my power back. It was me finally deciding to trust what I was seeing over the reality he was trying to sell me. There is so much power in seeing the truth, even when it's ugly. The truth can hurt, but lies destroy. They eat away at your sense of self. The truth, no matter how painful, is a solid foundation you can always build on. Lies are just a sinkhole that will eventually swallow you. And remember, what someone does to you is a reflection of them, not you. My story is just one, but I know so many of you have gone through something similar. That feeling of being made to question your own sanity by someone you trust is incredibly lonely. So, let's talk about it. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever had to unravel someone else's lies? Please share your stories in the comments. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they aren't alone. Let's build a community here and support each other. And if this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you so much for listening.